make a suggestion based on his or her experience with a trainee with similar problems on how those problems might be resolved by the first FTO. So it's very important. It's an information sharing session, and it is a time when FTOs learn how to do their job better. There are some other benefits to those periodic meetings, and I might say they are not all that costly. The benefits to those meetings are opportunities for additional training for FTOs, an opportunity for management and supervision of the FTO program to assess the FTO's interest, skill, and again, motivation in doing the job as we sit there and see them and hear them speak face-to-face about their experiences with the trainees. It's also a grand opportunity for the FTO that will be getting the trainee the next rotation to learn about the strengths and weaknesses of that particular trainee so that the FTO can begin right away by directing his efforts to remediate the problems that have been identified and consequently not waste any time going over material or going over skills that have already been identified as adequate on the part of the trainee. I want to go back to cost for just a moment. It's been my experience that when organizations consider implementing FTO programs, one of the aspects of the program or elements of the program that are often overlooked or cast aside is this meeting approach. I think some managers take a look at this and say that we're going to have to pay some overtime, and in fact it's going to be disruptive for some people to attend this meeting because they're going to be attending a meeting off shift, and it's easy enough to say let's not do this. Our experience has been that these weekly evaluations, or I'm sorry, these bi-weekly meetings or periodic comings together for these purposes that I've outlined are truly invaluable. And I would encourage agencies that are starting a program or perhaps have a program but are not incorporating the periodic meeting to at least give it a try in kind of a pilot approach. Try it for one recruit cycle. I would virtually guarantee you won't go back to not introducing or not utilizing this particular element of the program. A third procedure that is very important and bears some fleshing out is the development of the rookie book, the weekly task book, the training guide. It goes by a variety of names, but it's that list in great detail of things that the field training officer is required to discuss with the trainee or to demonstrate for the trainee so that the field training officer can assess the level of knowledge that the trainee has or the skill level that the trainee possesses in each of these particular areas. The training guide, the weekly task list, as I say, is one of the most difficult elements of the program to put together because contrary to the other forms that you've seen and will see, forms that can be shared from agency to agency with as little effort as whiting out another agency's name, the training guide or the weekly task list has to be agency specific. Because in that you will find references to the own agencies or the agency's own policies and procedures, to particular state codes, municipal codes, county codes, various locations within that particular community, whether it be a county, a state, or a city community. In other words, it really is custom-made or custom-written to a particular organization. And contrary, as opposed to merely duplicating somebody else's training guide, the agency members will have to sit down and create it themselves. Now, there's two important aspects, or perhaps I should say three important aspects, that should be incorporated into the training guide. The first one is we must list in very specific terms knowledge areas and skill areas. By that I mean instead of requiring that the FTO perhaps review officer safety with the trainee, we should list out in very specific terms as many different officer safety aspects or behaviors that we can think of. Because officer safety in a general term or stated generally conveys to the FTO that they should come off the top of their head with their perception of what officer safety should be. And it'd be unfortunate if some aspect of officer safety, an important aspect of officer safety, might be overlooked. So we want to list those out specifically. So a properly constructed training guide or weekly task list, or again, whatever it's called, is going to be pretty substantial in terms of the amount of pages and the amount of information that's in it. So that's one consideration. It has to be written in very specific terms. A second consideration is that it should be constructed in a week-by-week basis. rather than have a series of tasks and areas of knowledge that would be incorporated in the guide over the 10 or 12 or 16 or 20-week stay in the program, break it down into week-by-week segments. Breaking it into week-by-week segments does, one, fix responsibility on the FTO to cover that material in that particular week in the course of that particular trainee stay with that particular FTO. Secondly, it gets away from overburdening or underburdening the trainee with the amount of material that must be covered. And thirdly, because each trainee is exposed to the same information in the same period of time, indirectly becomes another evaluative instrument as we evaluate one trainee's progress in the training guide against the other trainee's progress, the other trainees in the program's progress in that training guide. So indirectly becomes an evaluative instrument. The third approach, whenever you can possibly do this in the training guide, is use or include the information in a procedure that's called planned progressive complexity. By that we mean utilizing one of the principles of learning, that people learn best when they learn from the simple to the complex. So when you're putting information in the training guide, information that the FTO has to cover, report writing, for instance, in 1 week, the first week that you'll speak about reports, put the information in there that's very simple reports, simple things, timesheets, perhaps a relatively simplistic reporting, such as writing a vehicle defect ticket, things of this nature. As each week would go by in which report writing is going to be covered, we want to add complexity so that at the end of the number of weeks, whenever they might fall, that you will be covering report writing. That's when we'll get into and provide training to the really complex reporting issues. So the simple to the complex, or planned progressive complexity. Again, specificity should be incorporated into the training guide, that the training guide should be broken into week-by-week segments, and thirdly, we should build that from the simple to the complex. Okay, one final thought, a suggestion for you while you're developing your training guide. Many organizations have begun to include resource material within the guide. The guide being, as you saw in your resource manual, a page with a list for the FTO to sign off that he discussed, that he performed, that the trainee performed, that the trainee acknowledged the training, and so forth. But as I say, some agencies have incorporated resource material right within that training guide, so that the FTO has a built-in lesson plan, if you will, when he's covering some of certainly the more important aspects of the information. A quick example I think you can all identify with is the department's use of force policy. Rather than to hope that the FTO can recall the use of force policy accurately and regurgitate that information, why not include a copy of the use of force policy in the training guide so that the FTO, one, will have the actual policy to teach from, and secondly, it's a reinforcement from the organization's position that the trainee in fact did receive and had readily available to him or her a copy of that use of force policy. It's an additional protection. So some thought might be given to including the more important policies and other important aspects of the department as resources right within that training guide, particularly in that week in which the FTO is designed or required to cover that information. Okay, so those are some of the procedures we hadn't talked about up to this particular time. I'd like now to shift gears to a few more forms that up until now we've yet to discuss and yet to show you. You'll find these forms again in your resource material. This first form that's in the manual that you have is the FTO application form. And a close examination of that form would reveal that we ask certain questions of the FTO in regards to his or her experience in the department, as well as their other occupational experience, any teaching or supervisory experience that they've had. In some instances, we see questions about their hobbies, when they were hired, what roles that they have played in the past in the organization, any particular special interests that they may have, expertise in the area of languages, and so forth. That form, by the way, is used as a pre-interview form so that the interview board, when interviewing the prospective FTOs, have a pretty good sense of what their background is. It becomes particularly useful in larger organizations where perhaps we don't know our employees as well as one might know them in a smaller organization. that form would be retained in the FTO program, in that particular FTO's file, whether or not they were selected for the position. And you may have heard me say an interview. I strongly encourage that the selection process of the FTOs begin with calling for volunteers. A call for volunteers includes a certain element of motivation, a certain assurance that the person is motivated when they come forward and say, yeah, I'd like to participate in this program. I'd like to try to be a field training officer. The difficulty with relying on others, such as their supervisors or management level personnel, to submit names is just that. Sometimes people really don't want to be there, or the people that are suggested might be suggested for the wrong reason. So I really encourage organizations to put out a call for volunteers and to set up an interview board asking questions that are relevant to the position so that they can get a sense not only of the person's interest in the job, their motivation for the job, but also their orientation to various aspects of the job. And looking also, as I said earlier, about the interpersonal skills that the field training officer might possess. An introvert is going to, an FTO that's an introvert is certainly going to result in 10 hours of silence in that patrol car, because we know the trainees are not going to initiate conversation. So the whole selection process for FTOs, as I've said before, is absolutely critical, as is the training and the supervision, and the more effective selection processes are those that start with volunteers and include an interview board. You'd be surprised how many rough diamonds exist in your organization, people that would do a great job for you as training officers, but would normally get the opportunity. Okay, the next form that I'd like to show you is this evaluation form, or the alternate week evaluation form. It's pretty straightforward on its face. It's a form that the FTO fills out before he or she would come to the alternate week evaluation session, the biweekly evaluation session, listing significant strengths, significant weaknesses, remedial strategies that the FTO has employed, the results of those remedial strategies, and suggestions on the part of the FTO as to the trainee's advancement or in the program, or their position in the program in terms of the history of the program. So that's pretty straightforward, but that form would stay in the file, in the trainee's file, as part, again, of the whole documentation process. The next form that you'll find in your resource material is the trainee's personal history. This is an excellent form and a form that we show to the FTOs, by the way, before they're about to get a trainee, so that the FTOs have a little sense of what the trainee is all about in terms of their background, their particular interests, their work experience, how well they may have done in school. In some instances, we see the academy rating incorporated in that information. So this form is again very important. We like to focus on the information in this form rather than perhaps some scuttlebutt that we may have heard from the academy. This is an attempt to focus really on the objective information that would be of value to us as we begin our relationship with that particular trainee. So the trainee personal history, one, again, that's filled out before the trainee comes on board, is shared with the FTOs so that they get a feel for the trainee that they're about to begin to work with. Okay. The next form is an excellent form. It's called the Report Exemplar Cover Sheet. It's used to act as a vehicle for the submitting of reports. Oftentimes, we might look at a report in a trainee's file and not really understand why that report might be there. It might be an example of real progress. It might be an example of continued mistakes the trainee is making. I recall one instance, I looked at a report, and the report read very well, and I thought it was an excellent job, until I was advised by the FTO that it was rife with errors. But I wouldn't have known that the errors existed had not the FTO told me. So we use this particular form, again, as a vehicle to submit reports, periodic reports. We certainly don't want to clutter the files with every report the trainee has. But the procedure is to attach this form to the front of the report, provide some explanation in the comment section as to why that report is being submitted, again, as a representative of great improvement or continued problems, whatever the case may be. It's an explanatory tool, and it too goes into the trainee's file along with the DORs and the other forms that are generated by the program. Okay, those are some of the more important reports, or some of the more frequent or familiar reports that we use in the program. And now to conclude today's presentation, what I'd like to do is just shift gears into a couple of other areas of the program that are relatively non-traditional. As well, you know, the program started off as an approach to train the police officer, street cop, and it's had many applications over the course of time to other occupational areas. But another aspect of the program is internal. Its internal use in other than how it was originally designed. One aspect is the so-called Reentry Program. A number of agencies now utilize the FTO program as a vehicle to reinitiate an employee to, let's say, the patrol function. Suppose we've had a detective that's been working in investigations 4, 5, 6 years, and now he or she is returning to patrol. A number of agencies use the FTO program to reinitiate or reorient this previous detective back into the patrol section or patrol division, utilizing FTOs who are certainly familiar with the procedures in the particular patrol division and the like to assist this person. This is not an evaluation procedure, but it's a reorientation procedure, and we see organizations allowing the returning member to spend 2, 3, 4, in some instances even longer or more weeks in the FTO program, but only as a reorientation. Again, no evaluation, but an opportunity for a person to re-enter the system without being just thrust into it after being away 4 or 5 years. We also see in organizations across the country the utilization of the FTO approach in such areas as narcotics and detectives, an internal application, spin-offs, identifying the role of the narcotics officer or the detective, utilizing a job task analysis, and developing standardized evaluation guidelines based on the role of the narcotic detective or the investigator, and consequently evaluating them as they are newly selected for those positions. I think you can be creative and think of all types of internal applications or spin-offs of the basic concept that can be utilized internally in areas other than the recruit officer. And now the last thing that I want to speak to is very important, and that is the necessity to avoid the reassignment of tenured officers into the FTO program. Some organizations, when they've identified deficiencies with tenured people, have assigned those tenured people to the FTO program. I can't think of a quicker way to drive a wedge between your FTO program and the rest of the organization by approaching problems that tenured officers have in this manner. The Field Training and Evaluation Program is designed to augment the basic academy training. If we look at most academies, we find a 2, 3, 4 month experience in the academy, and then we have our officers assigned to a field training program of 3 or 4 months. That leaves us 3 or 4 months left in the probationary period. In concluding today, what I'd like to do is to make a suggestion to you and give you some food for thought for perhaps reutilizing the remaining months of that probationary period. I guess I might say somewhat facetiously that if we aren't going to use the remainder of the probationary period, why even have it? So here's a suggestion I might offer you. First of all, a training given to all the first-line supervisors that might be dealing with these people that are being discharged from the FTO program. So we might look at graduation day. The officers get out of the FTO program. They're now assigned to various districts or sections or beats or teams, whatever the case may be. They are now assigned to the supervision of a first-line supervisor. Why not utilize that first-line supervisor to continue with periodic evaluations of the trainee's performance based on the same standards and the same evaluation approach and the same rating approach that we utilized in the FTO program?